All life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and it is. It wouldn't be life if there were not a temporality involved, which is sorrow, loss, loss, loss.
That's a pessimistic move.
Well, I mean, you can say yes to it, say it's great this way. I mean, it's the way God intended it.
You don't really believe that?
But this is the way it is. And I don't believe anybody intended it, but this is the way it is. And Joyce's wonderful line, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. And the way to awake from it is not to be afraid and to recognize, as I did in my conversation with that Hindu guru or teacher that I told you of, that all of this as it is as it has to be, and it is a manifestation of the eternal presence in the world.
Across ages, thought waves disseminate.
Peace. Heaven versus hell, or pleasure versus pain. There's a concept of heaven and hell in the two major religions. Peace. Heaven versus hell, or pleasure versus pain. There's a concept of heaven and hell in the two major religions of the world today. And in order to understand heaven and hell, we must seek to understand life as it is. And when you begin to look at life, we begin to see that mankind as a whole seeks after this one thing, no matter if it be male, female, or child. Whether it be a sinner or a saint, whether it be a rich person or a poor, whether it be a layman or a monk, whether it be a caveman or a modern man. Now, all things in life have two sides to them, so this one thing that mankind seeks after, the positive side of this coin, we will call happiness. Or if we were to take the flip side of that same coin, it would be the falling away or the eliminating of suffering. And this is for all mankind, whether it be the man who, male or female, when I say man, the man who goes to the bar daily to get a drink. He goes to find happiness and pleasure. So with the person who goes to the ball game, he goes to find pleasure. Same with the person who plays sports. They go for the pleasure. And often, these people call these things heaven at the time they're in it. And if we take the extreme case, we'll take the rapist. It's the same with the rapist. The rapist goes out and rapes to seek happiness and pleasure. The same with the person who seeks to eat, who overeats. They find peace, pleasure, happiness in this act. See, we seek happiness in the things of this world, thinking they can give us lasting happiness. And we see this when we were kids, and we can also see it in our own kids, that they desire a toy to fulfill their happiness. Yet, a week later, that same toy that brought happiness no longer fulfills that desire and is often left in the corner as the child desires another We can look at this when we eat. We can think of our favorite dish that gives us pleasure. And once we eat enough of it, it begins to make us sick or displeasurable. Same with a girlfriend or boyfriend. When we grow up, we have some people have them, some don't. But if you have a spouse, you can even, when you find the one that thinks is going to bring you pleasure, the pleasure that fulfills you, after a while, it grows old. And you seek another. The first noble truth in Buddhism is suffering. They call this a noble truth, meaning suffering exists, and it must be examined. And in order to find peace or happiness that is constant, we must fully understand the origin of suffering, or just even the concept suffering. See, these two concepts in the world's two biggest religions, heaven and hell, what I believe they miss is that the suffering they experience in this life is the hell that they seek to avoid in a future life. And as the Bible states, what I believe this suffering to be is a statement which is said in the Bible of weeping and moaning and gnashing of teeth, or anger. I went on a radio show about half a year ago, and they asked me about the concept of hell. And I said, well, the scriptures testify that you are in hell already. Because if you weren't currently in hell, you would have no need of salvation or to be saved. And that's the whole message that Christ came to deliver, salvation. See, if you aren't in hell, what do you need to be saved for? And salvation is just another term for heaven. Now, as I stated, all of mankind is seeking for this happiness, which is, if it's really seen truly, and when I say truly, when you get to experience that which knows all, or where all comes from, you will see that this seeking for happiness that every man, woman, and child have is deep down just a calling back to God or its source, whether they understand it or not. Because it is only resting in this source or God that constant joy can be obtained. And this is what the scriptures testify to. Especially if you read the Bible. It says God is your shield, your buckler, your protector. You will find rest in him. All these statements are throughout the Bible. Or if a non-religious person is listening, it's coming back to your essential self, or knowing the nature of reality. So since we do not investigate the nature of suffering as we walk through life, we go through life thinking happiness lies in pleasurable outcomes and pleasurable experiences. And this is what most Christians think of what heaven will be. Just a constant stream of pleasurable experiences and pleasurable outcomes. And so mankind seeks happiness in pleasurable outcomes. And when that outcome doesn't come to pass, what do you think happens? You already know, suffering. Because the happiness of the world and suffering are two sides to one coin. They are the same coin. You cannot have pleasure without pain. And I also want to differentiate pain and suffering as I go along, because they are not the same thing. So mankind's belief that happiness is to be found in pleasing experiences and pleasurable outcomes, or as the Buddhists would say, attachment to desires, is the reason suffering persists. And since we have this belief of happiness, we try to control life and circumstances to hold on to these pleasurable experiences. But when you examine life, just as the day turns to night, the summer turns to winter, a dry season turns to a rainy, so also it is with pleasure and pain. This is the flow of life. But pleasure and pain, when we search it out, they are arbitrary. What is pleasure for one is not for another. And the same with pain. What is painful for one is nothing to another. And so when you examine this, we see pleasure does not lie in the things themselves. Pain does not lie in the specific thing or outcome itself, but on our outlook or view of these things. So pleasure doesn't exist in, say, ice cream or sex or whatever pleasure you can think of. That item has no pleasure in it. It's just your outlook or view on that thing that either brings you joy or brings you pain. So the things themselves have no essence of pleasure in them. The pleasure comes from your view on them. So when we begin to learn this, that it's our outcome or how we our attitude towards these things. When we begin to see that, we begin to start to understand life and the flow of it deeper and deeper. See, true happiness or lasting happiness lies in contentment in all things. And many scriptures testify to this same statement. If you have peace in times of pain, then there will be no suffering in that time. See, pain and pleasure don't go away when one so-called reaches enlightenment or has realized their essence. What changes is your perspective towards it. And with this, peace and joy comes. And with these, absolute freedom. We allow life to be what it is. We no longer resist life as when we had believed ourselves to be against life. And this is what the Tao talks about. Not resisting the flow of life. We begin to realize we were never the doer of anything. Just as you don't do sunshine, or you don't grow your hair, you don't make it rain, or you don't do wind, you don't breathe. Breathing just happens. All these things just happen. You don't grow your body just grows. When you begin to realize you're not in control of these things, you will investigate deeper, you will realize that you are really not in control of your thoughts or your actions. Although the beautiful dream seems to portray that we are. And when you begin to realize this, like I said, we no longer resist life. We begin to accept life as it is. And we begin to align, as the Bible would state, our being with the will of God. And then that suffering that tends to follow regrets that we had about past actions because we thought we had to do it, or expectations about the future, our future pleasures that didn't come to pass, the suffering that accompanied them, or even the complaints about the present. The suffering that accompanied those things begin to gradually fade away. And when you realize your essence, as I heard it once stated, it's like, and this is how it is in my experience, but I'm just using a statement I heard. It's like when you unplug a fan, right? When you realize your essence, it's similar to at the time a fan is unplugged. The fan doesn't automatically stop suffering, but it takes a while to wind down and stop completely, because your body is hardwired as an independent self that you thought you were for so long. It takes time for the nature of your being to seep through the body-mind organism. And so gradually these things start to fade away. Pleasure and pain still exist, but your attachment or desire to outcomes and expectations and doership fade away. And this is why the Bible has such terms and symbols as baptism. Because baptism symbolizes a death of a self or a doer. And when you rise up out of the water, you're supposed to be a new being, meaning one with the Creator and His way. And when you become one with His way, you are at peace with all happenings. And thus, suffering begins to fall away. And thus, you will begin to experience that heaven that is talked about in the scriptures. So I'll end there. Shalom.